And so that's where the pugilism, punch him in the face sort of attitude, I think actually works. That's where I've come more radicalized and less laissez-faire.
The Cato Institute, a lot of people that I knew back in the day when I lived in Washington, D.C., it kind of a place, I used to call it kind of libertarian mecca. I would go there and hang out with all the economists and scholars, and they all seem pretty libertarian. But these days, I don't know if it's Trump derangement syndrome or what, but some of the stuff I see coming out of the Cato Institute just makes me scratch my head. Alex Narasta shares this report, says that political violence is mostly a right-wing problem. Then when I go and I watch the left-wing media, they're also saying that political violence is mostly a left-wing problem. Then I go and I read Tim Carney from the Washington Examiner. He says, don't believe the lies. It's a shoddy job that they're doing sharing this data. And you know what? I know Tim, so I reached out to him, and he's going to join us live right now. Good morning, Tim. Welcome to the show.
Morning. Thanks for having me.
I've been getting a lot of hate messages like I usually do, Tim, but lately I've been getting a lot more death threats. Is it me, Tim? Am I the problem? Do I deserve to die? Is this what this is all about? I mean, even the Cato Institute seems to believe that it's people like us that are out there firebombing and businesses committing assassinations. Tim, what the hell's going on?
I mean, for starters, there's been years of people saying that speech and ideas are violence. And then it's rational to think, okay, well, if that person's opinion is violence, it's self-defense for me to use violence in response to it. So that pernicious idea that holding a conservative or religious view is in itself violence, that makes it so that a lot of people out there somehow think, okay, well, some violence is okay if it's against opinions I really dislike. But very sensitive to that notion that maybe something in the left-wing ideology drives people towards political violence, there's been the favorite thing of the liberal media to do to say, no, we have the science on our side. We have the data. And they've been waving around 4 studies showing that, oh, the right is far more guilty of political violence than the left. And I focus not mostly on the Cato Institute study, but the Anti-Defamation League study and another one from something called the Prosecution Project from a left-wing professor, and just showed what they excluded, what they included, how they counted what. If you look closely at it, their claims totally fall apart.
So what are some of the most egregious examples that you've seen of data being twisted?
Well, so there's a couple things. One of these studies from the Center for the CSIS is the name of it, Center for Security and Information Studies and International Studies. It went ahead and it said, we don't count riots, because riots are mob violence, not political violence. But we do count January 6th. We don't count violence that happens at protests, but we do count Charlottesville. So that's sort of, a lot of these are judgment calls. But when every single judgment call points in the same direction, that tells you something. And then I look at the specific examples. There was a man who was a BLM supporter, and he drove his car, you probably remember this, into a parade in Waukesha, Wisconsin, killing 6 people, wounding dozens. That doesn't get counted in the ADL's study at all, because, well, there's signs that this man was mentally unwell, so that gets chalked up as mental illness. There was another man who was suicidal who had made a hit list that included Donald Trump. He went out, he was a white kid, he murdered an elderly white couple, just total strangers on the street. That gets counted as right-wing violence because among the various nonsense drawings on his weapon was a swastika. That is typical, I found, of the sort of research that goes into this.
We're speaking to Tim Carney from the Washington Examiner this morning. Why do you think that Antifa, as Chuck Todd calls it, the left-wing riots, why do you think that they get ignored? Do you think that it is an agenda that they're pressing here, Tim, that it is just an ideological backing for many of these reports?
I think the way a lot of media bias works is very subconscious. That you look at something. Imagine you are a liberal journalist who lives near me. Say you live in Arlington, Virginia. So your colleagues at work are all liberals. These are people who get married, who coach their kids' soccer games and all. They're good, upstanding people who, reject the Second Amendment. They think guns need to be controlled. They're pro-choice on abortion. They are even willing to pay higher taxes because they want the government to be bigger. And then you look at your neighbors and your local government and you think, okay, these people are my people and they're good people. So in the mind of your average New York, DC liberal journalists, liberals are just good people. And yeah, you know a couple good conservatives, but your idea of the conservative is Donald Trump or his most rabid supporters. So I think that they just think, okay, yeah, there are some people on the left who are violent, but come on. That's such a small detail. That's not the real story. So we're going to ignore that. And that sort of omission is not just, oh, we're going to cut this out of the story. It's we're not even going to think about it. There's 330 million people in this world. We can't tell every story. So some random liberal does something bad. That's not a real story. That's my charitable view that I actually believe is the right way to understand liberal media bias. They live in a social and professional bubble.
Yeah, that's true. And there's something ghoulish too about how quickly they hopped on this this narrative with their reporting because of how quickly they did it after the assassination of Charlie Kirk. Charlie Kirk wasn't even buried yet, and we were being forced to be, there was an onslaught of media that was telling us that this guy was a right winger, that, that this is he's a Trump supporter, yes. All of this kind of stuff. I mean, how are people who aren't as media savvy, perhaps as you and I mean, how do you think that the average American deals with something like that? Do you think they just tune out or what?
And I mean, I think that's a great question, Austin, because when I see liberal media doing that right away, well, first of all, just take a step back outside of ideology. When something horrible or a huge breaking news thing happens, the smart thing to do, dear all Austin's listeners, is don't believe anything you see on social media at all for like a week. The stuff on TV, even some of the stuff in the print online, the big name online publications, whether it's Fox or CNN, it will have a specific source. If it has one source who's anonymous, well, there's a 75% chance that story will change over time. So the best thing to do when something horrible like this happens is step away from the news, get together with your family or with your closest friends and pray for the country and ignore the news, because so much of it is going to be false. But when I actually wrote another piece on this about this for the Examiner just last night. It'll go up today. And I said, the key, look at how the left started to believe that the shooter was a right winger. The nugget of it, it started with the LA Times, went out and interviewed an expert. They love their experts. And this was a disinformation expert. Now, when you hear the word disinformation expert, you roll your eyes. But still, to the news media, these are real people. This was a disinformation expert who back in 2020 was one of the first people to say, oh, that Hunter Biden laptop thing, clearly that's a professional misinformation project, yada, yada. So they start with that expert. Then Jameel Hill, this commentator who used to be a sports commentator, now a left-wing political commentator, says, all the media is believing that this is a left-wing shooter, but the LA Times spoke to an actual expert. Imagine that. Again, they're expert fetish. They're expert fetish. And this expert was like, well, no, I think it's probably a right-wing shooter. You look at the engravings and this is, either Groyper stuff or yada, yada. And so, or MAGA, they started to say. It wasn't even the Groyper conspiracy theory, MAGA, or white Christian from Utah, that sort of thing. All of that happened because it's not just that they believe their side is better. It's that they will listen to anybody who calls him or herself an expert. Guys, don't. If don't trust me on this stuff, go and read my actual article and see if you think I've aptly debunked the ADL, aptly debunked the prosecution project. When somebody says I'm an expert, trust me on this, please don't.
Every once in a while, I'll have a relative visit, and they will want to turn. They're like, "Oh, can we watch TV?" And it's like, I don't have television. we don't pump that into our house. If you want to see it, you're gonna have to look at it on your phones or something. And I know, just to tell a personal story, I know Austin from back in days when we both were closer to television, and I remember saying once in the green room, I don't know whether it was Fox or MSNBC or CNN, I said,
I don't have a TV in my house. And the producers were like, you may not say that in this building.
Yeah, no, but when I have some certain relatives come over, they want to watch the news. So we turn on ABC News, and I'll watch it with them, and I'll just sit there and go, oh my God. It's a constant stream of lies and misinformation and disinformation and trusting the experts. And I'm just like, whoa. The people who watch this, they think that it's news. They think it's normal news. It's like, I read the Associated Press and I'm like, commies. And then I'm like, I'll read USA Today and be like, oh, those are fucking commies. They're even worse. It's unbelievable because they have this veneer of objectivism, but they're not objective at all whatsoever.
And it's impossible to tell good journalism from bad journalism for the average reader, right? And there's so much of both of it. So I often look at the New York Times and I think that's good journalism. And I'll show it to some of my friends who are on the right, and they're like, you trust anything in the New York Times? I said, no, but if you read this closely, you see how sourced it is. You see their documents. They link to it. I clicked on that link. The New York Times will do a lot of good journalism, and the Washington Post will do some good journalism. Thankfully, we have tons of friends on the right who do good journalism. But for the average reader who has other things to worry about, lawns to mow, kids to feed, a job to work, it's too bad that it's hard to distinguish the good stuff from the ideologically driven slop.
It's very selective. They're very careful about the way that they push their propaganda. Speaking of ABC News, we're getting some word, Tim, that ABC News may have actually caved to some of the pressure to put Jimmy Kimmel back on because speaking of the leftist violence, a lefty, what looks to be a professor, allegedly was the one who shot up this ABC News affiliate. Now they're putting him back on. What do you make of this story from the FCC pressure angle and the ABC News maybe caving because they had their affiliate got shot up? Your reaction to that?
I don't think that Brendan Carr and the FCC should have spoken up. I don't think it was their business what Jimmy Kimmel said, how ABC handles Jimmy Kimmel, how the market handles ABC and Jimmy Kimmel. I do not think that was Brendan Carr's place to voice his opinion. I think every other American should have gotten in line and had an opinion before the FCC. I also hope that my liberal friends and Democratic congressmen will join with me in outlawing the FCC. The couple good things they do can be offloaded into somebody else. There shouldn't be an FCC. And when Brendan Carr spoke up, even if you agree with his opinion about what Kimmel said and whether he belongs on the air, that turned Jimmy Kimmel into a martyr. So whether it was a shooting or the fact that they didn't want to be seen backing down to Brendan Carr, I think it made it more likely that Kimmel was going to turn into something of a martyr when the government spoke up. We have markets, we have critical media, we have so much more alternative media than we used to. And I think administration officials you have fewer rights. When you are in the government and you are a regulator, you actually have fewer rights than everybody else in the country to speak your mind.
So here's my argument with this, Tim, and you tell me where you see the flaw in my thinking. I've been getting a lot of help from my libertarian audience from suggesting that while I may not have loved this FCC stepping in, and I don't think they should have that authority, that in just basic game theory terms, you can't just always be the nice guy. The FCC was created by FDR. It was created, they wanted to go after the right-wing radio hosts that were making life hell for him. And my suggestion was that after having been bullied for decades by this institution, attacks on our speech, that the FCC, that while it's not the greatest thing ever, it's not really the biggest harm ever to enforce the rules that the left wrote against the left. Because the truth is, Tim, the Democrats aren't going to abolish the FCC and the Republicans aren't going to abolish the FCC. So if we have the FCC, why not use it to make Jimmy Kimmel feel the pain from the policies that the left have pushed, because he is breaking the law. The law is the FCC. The rules of the FCC are the rules. And the rules are you can't spread misinformation, disinformation, and lies, which Jimmy Kimmel, I would say, objectively does, and acts as an arm of the Democratic Party. we shouldn't enforce the rules against the left, even though they're going to enforce them against us. Please, whatever you do, Tim, just don't say they're going to, what will they do when they're in power? We know exactly what they're going to do, Tim. We know exactly what they're going to do. So that doesn't scare me anymore.
And they've done it before. What I would say is, in this specific case, what Jimmy Kimmel did was really bad. And if he was willing to come out and say, look, I tried to say this something else, it came out as this, I really deeply apologize. That's the sort of thing where I'd say, okay, well, I'm not sure I believe you, but I wouldn't want the government taking him off the air. In other words, this was a bad situation. It was not so egregious. It was not 100% obvious. And it would be a time for an apology, because I think he fell into the trap that I was just warning all your listeners about, which is believing early reports. And he lives in this little liberal media bubble silo. I never watched him. I'm either in bed or at a party at that night, or maybe watching, playoff sports. I don't watch late night TV, and I don't think most people should. But I think that his error was in the bounds of what ought to be handled by the market. If the FCC, I would like them to go more after pornography. I think there's a lot more harmful stuff out there. I'm sure there's stuff that, is encouraging gender transition and all that stuff, which is obviously harmful, obviously based on lies and intimidation campaigns that are much more harmful than something that I think was within the realms of the political. You and I both love the political fight. Charlie Kirk loved the political fight. There are things that we would say, oh yeah, you shouldn't have done that, but it's still within the battlefield. Throwing a brushback pitch in baseball or plunking the batter, it's allowed by the rules, but you just, I think that's where Jimmy Kimmel's thing came down.
Okay, and I appreciate and respect your views on that. I do think that at some point when you're getting beaten over the head with a baseball bat, that at some point you grab the bat and you knock them a few times with it.
I think that's what the Trump administration is doing to liberal academia. Mm-hmm. Okay. You can read a piece I wrote 8 years ago being like, Trump shouldn't go after academia because we should just let the debate happen. And then I changed my mind on that. I decided, okay, these guys aren't just overwhelmingly leftist. They have decided that we are intolerable. They have decided that conservatism is disinformation, misinformation, hate speech, and that not only should the faculty be 90% Democrat and 1% Republican, that conservatives shouldn't even be considered. You should have to write an oath to the left-wing ideology on gender and race to even be considered for it. And they have the public trust. They're not just allowed to exist over there with a little tax break from Boston or Massachusetts. They're getting hundreds of millions of dollars while being super rich. And so that's where the pugilism, punch him in the face sort of attitude, I think actually works. That's where I've come more radicalized and less laissez-faire, is go after academia like that. So
makes me feel better to hear that, Tim, because I think I would have been with you 8 years ago. I would have said that same thing. And I'm definitely feeling more pugilistic when it comes to things like these broadcasters, Jimmy Kimmel. But it is the case, though, that I think that the legacy media is dying, whereas academia is stronger than it's ever been, and therefore it is a bigger opponent. But maybe, you go after, it's like a video game. You take out the little weak guys before you go after the main boss. Tim, I'm loving your point of view. It looks like the audience is as well. They're throwing $10 bills at me in the chat because of the great conversation we're having. Is there anything that you're working on these days that you want to share, any kind of plug, or where can people find out more about your work? I'll give you the final word. Anything else you want to share?
I want to talk about babies. I wrote a book called Family Unfriendly last year about how American culture, more than even economics, is making it harder for people to have babies. And in the terms of what Charlie Kirk and Erica Kirk used to talk about, the best thing you can do is start a family, get married, have kids, dedicate your life to that. It makes it easier to not watch the news and not follow it too closely. So anyway, Family Unfriendly is my book about how our culture needs, our politics, but mostly ourselves and our priorities to put family first. The best role you can have in life, and you know this, Austin, is a husband and a dad. And that's what I try to drive home in this book.
I love it. Hey, Tim, thanks so much for getting up early and being so generous with your time this morning. We really appreciate it. We'll follow you over on X at TP Carney, and I did repost it. So if people are trying to find it, they can just head to my X page and they'll see you repost it up over there so they can follow you as well. Have a great day.
Thanks, man.